Welcome to ClearPoint Unlock. I'm Rob Cleghorn, CTO at ClearPoint, and I have with me today Jonathan Ackerman, one of our principal engineers, and we're going to talk a bit about AI, agents, and software engineering. Where's it all going? What's happening? So quite a bit going on in this AI space, and everyone's kind of asking us to look at the tea leaves and try and work out what's happening. Quite a good results came out from a survey from Microsoft, the workforce survey, where they came up with this idea of frontier firms. And it was based on 31,000 survey respondents around the globe and a whole lot of data from 365 and some really good insights from some leaders and thought leadership around the world. And what I found really interesting about it was that they had the emergence of this thing called a frontier firm. We can talk about that in a minute, but I really like the way they categorize it into three phases. The first phase being agent assisted, people using the tools and being agents.
Totally, yep.
And then the second phase was more around agent teams, where you've got some humans and some agents in the same team. That one's really interesting to me because I think that's kind of where we're really starting to see things pan out today. What are your thoughts on the agents and the teams and how that's going to play out?
Yeah, so I mean, that agent space is certainly in the last, say, 6 months really heated up. We're starting to see a lot of practical application of those agents. And I think it's a really, really interesting construct and approach to problem solving. So I think probably just taking a step back, for people who don't understand what an agent is. Currently, that phase one they talk about, where they're having humans with assistants, that's kind of what you would expect, or most people are seeing these days, where they say they're using ChatGPT, they ask it to do something, they get a single response, they take that away, maybe they have a bit of a conversation back and forth. But largely, it's the human initiating the conversation, the AI responding, doing some task and generating it back. Agents, on the other hand, is a much more interesting construct where instead of that kind of back and forth, you really have an agent set up or AI model set up where you can basically go, hey, can you please go and do this thing for me? And the AI will execute a number of turns or steps or processes. Maybe it will use some tools, call into databases, call some APIs, go and look up information on the internet, and perform those tasks. So a lot like a human would do if you gave a job to somebody and said, hey, please go and do this for me. That's where the agent model comes in. So it's quite a shift from that kind of just having a chat.
Quite autonomous, aren't they?
Yeah. So agents typically are far more autonomous. They have a memory. And then in most frameworks or architectures for an agent, they have effectively a toolbox of tools that you give them. So you might give an agent the ability to send an email or search the web or query a database or update a document or do any of those numbers of things. And then the agent itself decides how it's going to use those set of tools you've given it to solve the problem you've asked it or the task you've asked it to achieve. So it's quite a different...
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And the thing that's I think is quite exciting is as you look at the agent assisted and you end up, I think most of us use the tools, writing cursor and writing code with it and as code assistants and even agentic mode sometimes inside the IDE. There's kind of a limit to how much that can scale because there's kind of one person in control and telling it what to do and watching it do stuff and making sure it's okay. And that's great. And it's a lot faster. When it comes to software engineering, it's like giving a faster hammer to some of the engineers. They can dig faster and keep going, but it doesn't really scale at the same sort of magnitude as agents. And I think that's where the potential and opportunity is.
Yeah, totally. So we've seen a lot of those agents happening in the engineering space, tools for the engineer. You can set the agent away and go and do some stuff and you keep an eye on it to make sure it's doing what you've asked it to do. But software engineering itself is far wider than just the code part, right? And there's far more people involved than just engineers. So really, I think the real interesting space is where else in that software engineering ecosystem can you apply an agent? And I think anyone looking into that should think about where all the boring bits that we can get rid of, or where are the things that we just don't have time to do that perhaps we can get an agent to do so we can lift the quality of what we're doing. So, for instance, we're working on agents that look at your backlog and look at the backlog items and analyze them against your team's ready definition, and then provide some feedback. Hey, this thing isn't quite ready because you haven't done this, or you're missing this bit of information and stuff. And that can just amp up the quality of the items in your backlog so that by the time it enters into the development cycle, it's solid. There's no ambiguity about what needs to be done. It's been thought through, and the team can get on and execute.
Yeah, it's amazing how much time developers spend trying to do that stuff, right? And all the things that where they should be on the tools or could be on the tools or doing some of that deep thinking, they're actually somewhere in that process of getting things ready so that they can start working on stuff.
Yes, engineers would tell you the bane of their existence is endless meetings and having discussions and unclear requirements, right?
Yeah.
The old classic guy go garbage in, garbage out. In software engineering, poor requirements or vague requirements end up with things taking longer, far harder, and being poor quality at the other end. So you can see how having an agent apply to that or helping out in that space, which, somebody within the team would typically do, but they also have other things they need to do. So maybe they couldn't do it with the same rigor and consistency that an agent would be able to apply to that.
Do you think there's too much hype around the fact that LLMs are really good at creating code, and that fact that everyone sort of thinks, it's just code. We don't need software engineers anymore. The LLMs can create all this amazing code and we're not going to need the software engineers. But we both know that, like we've just said, this thing software engineers do is the coding's a small part.
Yes.
So is that overhyped, or is there actually we're just not really embracing the other areas enough?
Yeah. So I think where coding agents are at the moment, or they're a lot like a junior dev. They are competent at writing some code, but they need fairly clear direction. Sometimes they get carried away. They'll code around a problem, or they'll get excited and go change things they're not supposed to do. So you still really have to keep an eye on them at the moment and kind of give them that clear direction. And so I think, yes, they can take a significant load off a developer or multiply out. The mythical 10 times developer thing is probably much more of a reality these days. But they still need that kind of guidance and attention. And I think the other thing that's probably still true within the code agent space is that to be able to get a coding agent to do a good job, you have to actually talk to it like it's a software engineer. And so you still need engineering skills and disciplines to be able to explain adequately what needs to happen and to interpret what's coming further up the chain.
Yeah. And just trying to think about what it means as a software leader to bring in 10,000 junior devs overnight. What could go wrong? I mean, how do you keep yourself safe? What are the things you need to do to make sure that, obviously we're not going to take the tools away from people because that's just going to slow down progress, but we've got to keep ourselves safe somehow. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting problem. I mean, firstly, if you AI isn't miraculous, right? It's not suddenly going to become way smarter than your average developer, for instance. It acts very human-like. If you give it bad input or bad instruction, it's going to probably do a bad job out the other side. So if you suddenly say, well, we're just going to wheel in 10,000 agents and they're going to do their thing, well, who's going to help them do the thing, explain what needs to be done, or more importantly, who's going to evaluate the thing that they're doing is actually the right thing, right? And so, in the agent space, in a lot of the current conferences and stuff, a big focus is not only on hey, we can create agents, but it's like, how does it fit in with humans in the loop? How does it fit in from a usability point of view? How do humans trust? Our organization's going to trust it, and also, how do you evaluate that it's doing what it needs to do, right? And these things do need some care and feeding. You often need to be able to take your best practices and your guides and distill that down in a manner that these agents can use.
Well, they almost become even more important, those practices, don't they? Those engineering principles, and that we want to have separations of concern. We want to have isolation, maybe infrastructure isolation from certain things to make sure that the blast radius is small.
Yep.
So all these junior devs can come in and be a bit safer and a bit more less risk, I guess, in terms of massive volumes of code coming through, but still keeping ourselves safe and still delivering quality.
Yes. And I think as if you are a senior person in this space, you have typically built up many potentially decades of tacit knowledge. You can look at a problem and go, oh, that's the bit that's going to fall over, or that bit over there is actually going to be the problem child, when most people are like, how did you even know to look at that, right? So how do you take that knowledge and distill it down, both for, it's a classic problem for giving it to your new starters, your developers and juniors and stuff, but even then How do you, same problem, how do you give that to an AI agent so that it is able to do a good job or use that as guidance to do the work it needs to do? So yes, it's a very interesting problem.
And how long do you think they'll be junior developers before they become intermediate, senior, or still principal level?
Yes, so it's very interesting. I think the rate of change is insane. Normally we see your classic little hype curves. Normally they take a year or two to complete. We're now seeing things often come through in like 6 monthly, 3 monthly, sometimes at a month at a time. Like a whole new thing turns up. About a year ago, retrieval augmented generation, RAG, was seen as like the primary mechanism by which you could do things. You effectively take your documentation, take your knowledge bases, structure them in the manner so that they're easily searchable. And then when a human asks the AI to do something, you first go and search that, grab snippets of knowledge, provide that as context to the AI to do its job, and then you get a good grounded answer out the side. And everyone was like, well, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
6 months later, agents start making an appearance, and now almost everyone's like, oh, well, RAG's just like a table stakes capability. We're just going to give that search engine to an agent, and it can decide when it's going to look stuff up, and then we're going to give it all these other tools. And, we've completely shifted focus, and that's only been about a 6-month cycle.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's completely nuts.
And then Anthropic came out with MCP, and how quickly has that been becoming a de facto standard?
Yes.
We're having a conversation the other day about, we'll be in the future looking back at what was the point in time we lost control of the AI agents? Well, there's this thing called MCP that came along, and we just said, yeah, connect to everything, and off you go.
We just give it access to everything. Yes,
and what could go wrong?
What can possibly go wrong? Yes.
Yeah, no, but it's moving fast, and the agentic stuff is so interesting because there's so many opportunities you can do, and it's not just software engineering, but also across internal tooling for workforce and staff and all those things. Seen quite a few tools come up, some open source, some obviously the cloud providers are very busy building tools and trying to keep their ecosystem healthy and everyone focused on the things that they do, which is great. But there's lots of options. Where do you start when it comes to looking at some of the tooling for agents and some of the processes, and maybe some of them are workflow based, some of them are baked into the tools?
Yeah. So at the moment, creating the agent, a well-structured agent, is still kind of like an engineering job. There's a lot of good code frameworks. There's a lot of good knowledge and understanding there, but it's not, for instance, something you can easily give somebody else who's perhaps not non-technical to create the agent. So you still have this kind of like a barrier to entry. So certainly, we mentioned that phase 2, when we start introducing agents as digital co-workers to work alongside humans, getting those agents built is still difficult. But whether you are seeing, I suppose, and probably where it will most likely go, is more introduction of kind of your low code type tools, something more visual. You can be less technical. You can clip things together like Lego blocks. That with a little bit of training in the right person's hands, they can look at even just their daily tasks and automate it for themselves, even if they're not doing like automating like for everyone in the business. So you're likely to maybe over time build up your own personal set of little agents to do things for you, take away all the boring stuff in your day job, eliminate that so you can focus on the more interesting things. So I see that happening. And then, of course, the other direction that it is likely to head is agent writing agents. So, for instance, some of the experiments when we've done, once we've built kind of a good example of an agent, and we've then been able to take that along with, say, the documentation for the framework we've used, provide that to another agent and say, hey, can you write me an agent? And you just supply the bullet points and it goes away and writes you code. That mirrors the best practice of the agent that we've been
it's a bit Inception, isn't it?
It is a little Inception, yes.
Maybe we'll change that. It all went wrong when we did MCP and agents writing agents.
Yeah, agents
that was
writing
the moment.
Agents, that's right. And then we just let them do that over and over again, yes. Yes. So that may be a way. Once again, you are at that end, and this is where some of the vendors' tools are sitting. You're still kind of stuck to some point because you have to be able to adequately explain what it is you're trying to do so that the agent itself can write the tooling. But I see, as we're talking about agents, not just at the software engineering part of it, but in the entire process or pipeline, you're probably not far off having agents that, for instance, could go and interact with a stakeholder or several of them ask the right kind of questions, extract the right kind of, why are we doing this thing? What do you want to do? What are you trying to achieve? What's the constraints you're under? And use that to extract requirements and pull it out. So if you imagine what a classic product owner, BA type role, all that discussion up front, like, we need one of these. And then it's like, well, why do you need one of those? Are you sure you need one of those? You don't need one of these. Could there be a tool that could be given to stakeholders, business folk, that will allow them to quickly iterate quietly by themselves or with themselves to firm up the idea so that they can present solid information further into the rest of the team as well, right?
It's interesting. I've got a meeting request for a Zoom with this thing called Jonathan Agent. What's the face behind that? Is that going to be your face?
That's right. I regret that there is actually a video aspect to online meetings. If it was just all voice or text, I could probably have turned myself into an agent by now. But yeah, it's a little harder to fake me yet.
Well, I know you've been building lots of agents. What are some of the other ones we've been playing with?
Yeah, so we've been kind of exploring besides just what happens to code. So there's one I mentioned right at the top, and it's like looking are your tickets in your backlog of a suitable quality to enter the pipeline. We are another one that's kind of actually looking every time anyone completes a set of code, merges it back into the main code base. It actually looks at all the code changes, understands some of the code changes, and then goes and finds the documentation for that and then automatically updates the document. So if you add a new feature, change a key bit of logic, or maybe update some kind of magic number or value within the code base, it can automatically go and update your documentation. Therefore, your documentation is continually reflecting the actual code. I don't know, as an engineer, we always say the best documentation is the code, but not everyone can go and read the code. So, this is the next best thing. Another one of those that we're working on is at the end of the process, there's an agent that's basically scanning through all the completed tickets. It looks at all the commentary that happened on that, looking for things like issues with the requirements or bugs that happened or, conversational points that went around in loops throughout the lifespan of that ticket, getting that bit of functionality built. And it generates summaries of those and then does summaries of summaries and analyzes that and goes, actually, fundamentally the team process, there's a problem here, or this could be better or whatever. So it's effectively building bullet points that can then go into retros or whatever to help the teams understand, where they could be better, where their process could be better, where things are going awry. And that can be used for them to identify, maybe there's areas of technical debt in the solution they should focus on. Maybe there's issues with the way they get in requirements in. Maybe there's other technology issues that are causing their software to be slow to deliver and problematic to deliver. Are
you suggesting we won't need agile coaches anymore? Making the world a better place?
Well, I think agile coaches are interesting because they often fulfill that role and they have the ability to look at the big picture. But I think most importantly for organizations that have them, that's a case where they've invested people who have time to actually step back and look at that. And not all organizations have those people available. And those teams who don't, you kind of expect the team to do it, but of course they're doing all other things. So, that's a classic example where we can support a team with an agent doing an important task and doing it all the time and not just as a side job as part of the main job that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's really interesting. So what was phase 3? It was human-led agent operated. So that was phase 3 of the survey.
Yes.
And I think they were sort of suggesting, it was a bit vague because, tea leaves and all that, but I think they were suggesting 12 to 18 months from phase 3. And what they were saying is a human will be controlling a group of agents. They're a lot smarter, the agents, and they're trying to work out what that human looks like. And it's pretty hard to know because there's lots of different domains and lots of different areas. But one thing that sort of started to come through is that human is most likely got some really good leadership skills because they need to actually lead these things and guide them and go through that space, which I thought was really interesting. And we'll see how that plays out. And I think, I don't want to read too many tea leaves of the things, but we do know it's going to get better. We do know that we're heading in this direction. We do know it's going to scale. So focus on the things we can control and we do know. But then what about phase 4, which wasn't in the report? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So if you think through that natural progression, phase 4 is agents leading agents. Then where are the humans in that model? That becomes quite a scary thought. Obviously, organizations probably love that idea to some degree. It's like, hiring intelligence, hiring people to do work is probably the most expensive thing out of large organizations. So if you say, well, we can unclip people out of the problem, that's great. On the flip side, if you start looking slightly ahead, I think depending on how fast that happens, it is a very interesting problem for us as a society, as a civilization. You could imagine, we have a number of the AI product CEOs, the guys from Anthropic, the CEO from Klarna, who's like fully embraced AI, maybe an early adopter, is that whole process, kind of sounding all sorts of interesting alarm bells about, 50% of white collar new entry jobs are probably gone. Klarna's rapidly increasing its year-on-year revenue 33%, but they've already downsized about 2,500 people out of their workforce.
Well, they're an interesting case, aren't they? Because they're actually dropping the SaaS companies too, thinking that they can actually use AI to build a lot of the software that they're paying these SaaS companies for.
That's right.
Which is an interesting space because you can see how that's playing out. If I have to spend all this money on a SaaS license and actually I can get a team of agents to build some software for me, then that could be quite a different way of thinking about things. And I guess that came from Satya Nadella, who said that, SaaS is dead, and he's a bit of tongue in cheek because obviously SaaS isn't going anywhere, but it was more the fact that we're going to be building a lot more software. We've got these swarms and teams of agents come in, and they're only going to get better.
Yeah, so Klarna's interested in their approach because they had 5,500 people. They're now down to 3,000 people. They're still growing. They've said they've got AI customer support agents that do the job of 700 people. But they didn't just go and lose a whole bunch of people. What they basically did was put a hiring freeze on and put a lot of focus into the technical folk and shifted people around and that kind of stuff, and then were able to build. And so they basically leveraging it to keep the company lean from a people point of view, but bolster the quality of what they do by having AI and AI agents, which is a very interesting thing. I mean, on the flip side, they've also gone, we discovered people really like to talk to other people. So our 700...
A bit of backlash?
Yeah, a little bit of backlash. Those 700 people that we said we don't really need anymore, we probably do need, because people like to talk to other real humans, particularly if they have a serious problem to deal with. But it's that balance, maybe you have humans as the face, and they're backed by that workforce of agents doing the job for them, or helping them, or assisting, or doing all the busy work, and they can focus and maybe up their game on that personal service. Maybe every customer could have a personal customer service person, because you can now scale that out because you've got all the agents. They're not incentivized on call turnaround times and trying to get that down to 5 minutes and just get you on the phone, figure out your problem, get you off the phone, right? If the AI agents are doing a significant amount of their work, that person can maybe spend a half an hour on the phone and talk to you or whatever, to improve the quality of their customer interaction.
So where are you on the scale from nervous and freaking out to super excited, massive opportunity for humankind?
So I think my nervousness factor depends on how quickly that agent-leading agent space happens, because that's almost inevitable. If that takes 20 years to happen, I think our societal structures will have time to adapt. If that takes 5 years to happen, or 3 years to happen, I think the whiplash from that is going to be quite interesting and very problematic. I mean, things fundamentally, if you say, well, an organization doesn't need as many people to do what it used to do, so there's all these people who no longer have jobs. Not everyone can become an artist or an artisanal craftsperson, right? And all of a sudden you have a mass pool of people with no money. What does that mean for a business? Well, if you don't actually have anyone to buy your products and services, it doesn't matter how good you are. So then your model,
no one's got money to pay for it. Yeah,
no money's going to pay for it.
No one's got time to read all that content that you're creating.
That's right. That's right. So that's where the things like universal basic income, question marks about socialism, capitalism, what are the fundamental models that we operate under, correct? As I say, if it's 20, 30 years away, we'll have time to figure out. If it's 3 to 5 years away, I think that will be very telling.
Well, 10 points for not really answering the question properly, but we'll work through it. So yeah, it's interesting. This is interesting. I actually see it as quite an awesome opportunity, particularly in the next few years for New Zealand, because we've always struggled with scale. We're only a small country.
Yes,
and it's we've got lots of innovation, lots of great ideas. The cloud came along and that really helped us because we could then scale with infrastructure as much as we wanted to. But now we're potentially, if we get these agents going really well across different industries, but particularly software engineering, we can take those ideas and we can execute on them. And that's really what innovation is, right? Executing those ideas. And at a scale we've never seen before. We don't have the millions of developers like, the offshore companies, places like India and areas like that, where there's plenty of resource on tap. We're pretty constrained, but at the same time, we've got lots of ambition. So it's pretty exciting opportunity if we make the most of it.
Yeah, I mean, historically, New Zealand has had terrible productivity rates. We don't tend to invest, often because it's expensive to invest in our...
We're a bit tight.
We're a bit tight, yeah. And we're like, we can just put Bob in there and Bob can just keep doing more or keep going. But what the AI ecosystem unlocks for us is perhaps not people on tap, but intelligence on tap, right? So the cost of maybe automating a workflow or adding an agent to simplify things is a lot like the cloud is been driven down, and therefore it's readily accessible and achievable for even a small company to actually look at what they're doing and go, actually, we can improve all these things here, and we can use AI tooling or AI steps or AI processing as part of that process in a cost-effective manner without having to, say, ramp up massive engineering teams or heavy investment in infrastructure and people and development times and all that other kind of stuff too.
Yeah, maybe not need all that capital that they have on tap over in America.
Yeah,
we can sort of scale with our own finances or different models.
Yes, and I feel a lot of these tools that are available would appeal to our number 8 fencing wire thing, where we just like, we can glue this bit and automate that bit, and ta-da! I've simplified this whole process.
Sticky tape of agents,
and once you actually peel back the surface of the stuff, it sounds all uber technical and stuff, but actually once you pull back what these things are and how they work, with a little bit of training, almost anyone can build it. And as the tooling improves and as the ecosystem improves and it becomes more or less of an engineering exercise to assemble these agents, I think that would just make it easier and better.
What do you think the best ways are to get into it with it, to get started?
Well, that is an interesting question. So I think probably the first thing to do is there's two things. First is to get a good understanding or grounding in what AI is, or in particular, when we talk about AI is really machine learned models, and most people are really referring to generative AI. I mean, there's lots of other things all around that, but what everyone kind of thinks is AI is, they know it as ChatGPT. I talk to it, it's smart, it says stuff back. But I think everyone really needs a good understanding of what the base level of those things are. At the heart of it, those models effectively just guess the next word in a sentence, right? So everything you're seeing, all this intelligence, all this capability is really fundamentally from something that goes, given that these are the previous words, this is probably the next one in the sentence.
And they're just getting better and better at guessing it.
It's getting better and better, but that's because we're now knowing we've got a model that guesses the next word in the sentence, but now we've actually taught it how we would like it. We do all that supervised learning, those instruct learnings, like if somebody said this or had a problem like this is how we would approach it. Same things with the reasoning models. If here's some examples, this is how you might approach it. Go into a reinforced learning model to tune it to the point where it's able to kind of think about what it's doing.
It's cool seeing that thing think along, isn't it? As you sort of expand the thinking bit and see what it's doing, and then finally it comes back with a response.
Yeah, and I mean that model under the covers, all it's doing is it's generating the next thing it needs to think, next word in the sequence, and then using that thought process that it's learned about how to think through things to then apply it to the problem you ask. So it's kind of like generating its own stream of words to then use as context to actually solve the problem you want.
I'm getting a bit bored now. I'm just going to go back with something.
Yes, and you see interesting little comments in there. It's like, oh, this sounds like an interesting problem. And you're like, well, that's an interesting thing for the model to just randomly throw in there, probably coming out of its training data and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to understand that, with that grounding, understand why it works, why it doesn't work, where you can lead it astray, what a hallucination is, that kind of foundational thing, so that you can have realistic expectations and not fall into the trap of its magic or it is super intelligent or anything like that. And then the other thing to do is like step back and look at the things you do in a day-to-day basis. What's boring? What could be automated? And then maybe I'll go learn this particular tool, or I go find somebody who knows something and ask them to help me build this tool. But if you could codify a process that you do every day, it's really easy to clip together. I'll give you a random good example. I got really, really bored of having to every week go and look at the Auckland City Council website to figure out which rubbish day I'm supposed to be putting out which bins on which day. So I created myself a little agent flow. It wakes up every Monday, runs off to the Auckland Council website, loads up the page for my household, grabs the 3 dates for the 3 different types of bins, gives that to an LLM to convert into some JSON form, and then gives it to another agent, a tool using agent there. And that tool using agent, I've given it the ability to read my family calendar, retrieve events from the calendar, and update events. And what it does is it basically looks at the dates, goes and updates the calendar, and goes and sets a reminder for me the night before I'm supposed to put out the bins, telling me which bins I need to put out on which days. And that runs every Monday morning. And now I no longer have to go and search it up every Thursday or Monday, or remember there was a public holiday or something else has shifted. It's just basic scut work.
It'd be great when you add that to a robot that can go and get the teenagers to go and put the rubbish out as well.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. The teenagers are probably a lost cause, so I might just have to buy a humanoid robot and get it to go.
Oh, of course, they can just do the rubbish themselves.
They can just do the rubbish themselves. It'd be nice if the teenagers would put the bins out, but yes, that's
one day
not going to happen. So we spoke about phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Phase 0, we probably have a whole raft of companies that haven't even managed to get themselves to phase 1. What do you see out in the market of what are companies struggling with? What are the things they really need to tackle to kind of get themselves to that phase 1 stage at least?
Yeah, it's just the thing is that because it's easy to talk about this stuff and be lots of ideas and hype and start building some things when it's all brand new. But when you've got existing systems and customers and a lot of responsibility and brand and all that stuff, you've got to be a little bit more cautious than just throwing tools and hoping for the best. So there's quite a bit of caution, I guess, particularly some of the heavily regulated industries. And I think there's probably an element of just really understanding it, everyone getting a better understanding. In most of those cases, the LLM and the AI is just another cloud service, and they're already in the cloud. They've already got their customers on databases in the cloud. And so the risk isn't as bad as it first sounds. So it's really just trying to work out and understand that, and then, being able to work out how you keep that safe and get a bit of mostly education, but some policies and practices in place to enable that teams to really get going, and I see it as a leadership's responsibility to make it happen, not to say no, but to work out a way of saying yes. And I think that's really important to try and take on as a leader, to try and make sure that you're enabling your teams to really embrace these things and look at the opportunity and the doing more with less that you get from using these tools.
Yeah, and I think also that saying yes, but is really important, because more and more now you're having employees who have an expectation that they will have access to these kinds of tools and stuff. And we're getting little stories on the side of, well, the organizations shut down access to ChatGPT or whatever because they haven't quite formed up policy yet. And then you discover employees are either shadow IT on the side or quickly using ChatGPT on their phone or something like that, because they want it and they're trying to use it to improve what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But they're all is kind of shutting them out. So, what do you think about that kind of?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can say no to the engineers to use the tools, but they're probably using them on their weekends.
Yeah.
And at some point, they're going to get pretty frustrated at having to come to work and not have the tools on tap and having to slow down and, do things another way. So, it's kind of like a ticking time bomb in some ways. You're going to have to work out how to go forward and to get amongst it and to keep it safe, and work out the parameters and get everyone responsible for keeping it safe and using the tools that you provide them, but making sure that the tools are good.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even think it's just in the engineering space. I heard a really interesting story about a person who was hired as a content and copywriter, and they turned up and they said, "Why have you blocked access to ChatGPT? I use it as part of my fundamental workflow, and I had estimated that it's going to take me this long, but you've cut that tool off, so now I'm going to take twice as long to do the work that you originally hired me to do."
Yeah,
which is a really interesting tale. And I imagine over time, those organizations who, for want of a better word, are anti-AI will find that it's going to be harder and harder to hire the people they want to hire if they have those kind of draconian restrictions. So I think it is important that they operate in that boundary of safety. But
what was that WhatsApp message you got yesterday from your friend in London who?
My friend in London, who was the big ChatGPT outage.
Yeah.
posted it on my chat there, and he was like, he's in the UK time zone, so it didn't really affect us because we were sleeping. But he was like, yeah, it's been done since 10 a.m. and we've been having to code everything by hand. It's really, really rough. Was his comment, right? Yeah, which is classic because you kind of build not a dependency on, but you kind of you expect it there, right?
So
and
your coding buddy.
your coding buddy, I can ask it some questions. I can get it to write myself a little function as I'm going. I can just like lift myself up to thinking about the bigger problem and not sweat maybe some small details that I need to code around. And yeah, if it's suddenly gone, it's gone. It's like going back to Notepad, like losing IntelliSense, and you're just writing things on punch cards.
Gonna have to think for myself. Damn it!
Dang it! I have to remember what that API is, and yes, no, terrible.
So pretty interesting chat. What do you think? What's next? What's next for you and what you're going to be focusing on over the next wee while?
Yeah, so what I'm really working on at the moment is taking these agent constructs and applying them to real problems for our customers, not only just in the productivity side of things or the automation side of things or in the software engineering side of things, but actually building them into products. We're working with a lot of interesting companies and startup businesses who have things they need to do that AI readily lends itself to it, and agents lend themselves to it. So I'm working with organizations who need hyper-personalized product recommendations, for instance, and the AI is completely leaning into that. Not only like, for instance, understanding the profile of the person and what their needs and wants are. It takes that. It then, for instance, builds custom searches for products, goes and finds matches for those products. And then for each of those products, takes a look at the product individually and matches it to the person's needs and wants and creates a unique ranking for it. It's like, you'll probably like this product because it's this, this, and this, but this is a bit iffy for you. You might not like it because of these reasons. But out of all the stuff you've asked me for, these are the best products that probably fit, right? So hyper-personalized recommendations, not just like wisdom of the crowd, like, because 5 other people we think are like you, like that, therefore this product must be good for you. Everyone's got their own individual needs and wants and that kind of stuff. So things like that, obviously chat interfaces, talk with your code type tools, all sorts of interesting niches that we can fit these.
The talk with your code tools are quite interesting, aren't they? I put a big code base in it. I've been working for one of our clients for quite a few years, and I probably learned more in 2 hours of chatting with it and having it as an LLM, interrogate it for me, than over those 10 years of looking at the code. And I've actually built this agent, which is quite interesting. It's called, I think I've got a name called Journey Agent, because every code base has a journey, right? And there's a story behind all of them. And it takes all the commit messages from the code base and just tells you a bit of a story about what happened and what's been focused on. And there's a bit of refactoring done here, and there's some more features came in here, and then Bob did this and added this, and then there's a whole lot of test automation finally came, a couple of years later.
Yeah,
doing stuff that was written a few years earlier. You can see quite a bit about this. It's just quite fascinating. I'm not sure how useful it is, but it's really fascinating to read, particularly code bases well, and just seeing that journey evolve and having it summarized and described in a couple of pages is quite fun.
Yeah, I mean that catalog. I'm not sure if you've ever played with the visualizations. There's software that will read those logs and then like visualize
like 3D,
all the files coming in and flying, and builds these fantastic visualizations. But that actually a lot like a history book captures the evolution of a system really nicely, right? And often you might have a platform that's 5, 10, heaven forbid, 15 years or older, right? And the people who worked on that are no longer around. Why decisions were made? Why did something happen? How did it happen? When did it happen? That is probably lost to humans, but would be captured in things like that, and maybe snippets of documents and all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine, I always refer to that, and we often do that when we go to a customer for the first time and they've got a lot of like legacy platforms and that kind of stuff. That archaeological aspect of like trying to unpick, what it is that they have, how did they get there, why certain things were done at certain times. Because you often look at it and go, whoever did this was mad, but they weren't mad. They actually had really good reasons. They're a bit lost to time. So you can imagine that agent kind of trying to resurrect that back for you, pulling all that back for you, and being able to then explain how you got to where you are. And that would help give people the context for understanding where to take it forward. Or even just if they do decide, hey, we need to replace this thing, being able to say, what does this thing do? Why is this there? What are the business rules for that? Explain the flow or the journey through this application because I don't understand what's going on over here, right? And providing those tools to the non-engineers so that people can understand them.
If you go back 20 years, we weren't that good at documentation of our code bases, were we?
No, we were terrible.
It's the last thing that we never had time for.
That's right. Yes, that's the last thing we do is actually write any documents, right? It's that's right. The code is the document.
Problem solved.
Problem solved. Yes.
Well, on that note, thanks for your time, Jonathan. It was a good chatting, and let's see where this AI goes.
Indeed. It's interesting space.